The black woman was left for dead with a newborn baby girl, until the silent rancher walked in and took them. The trembling mother's final breath misted against her infant's face as buzzards circled the abandoned stagecoach, both casualties of the unforgiving Texas plains. Passing travelers had seen her darker skin and turned away, whispering that another fallen woman got what the Lord intended. The town assumed she'd become bleached bones by winter, a cautionary tale for Sunday sermons. But the towering, bearded giant who found them saw only people in need, not problems to avoid. His weathered hands lifted both mother and child with unexpected gentleness, carrying them toward his isolated homestead where secrets lived in every shadow. Yet as the woman's strength slowly returns and the rancher's mysterious past unfolds, a reckoning approaches that could destroy the fragile sanctuary they're building. Will trust bloom between two broken souls, or will the frontier's harsh judgment bury their chance at redemption forever? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The sun blazed mercilessly over the abandoned stagecoach. Lena Jackson's lips cracked as she whispered a final lullaby to her newborn daughter. Ruby's tiny fingers grasped at nothing while her mother's strength ebbed away like water in sand. 3 days had passed since the robbery. 3 days since the bandits left them for the desert to claim. The other passengers had fled at the first sign of trouble, but Lena couldn't run. Not with a baby only 2 weeks old. Her vision blurred. The endless blue sky seemed to mock her prayers. She had escaped New Orleans with nothing but hope and her teaching certificate. Now even those seemed worthless against the brutal frontier. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her delirium. Elijah Kane pulled his horse to a stop beside the wreckage. The massive rancher took in the scene with careful eyes. Bodies of bandits scattered around told most of the story. But inside the coach, life still flickered. He dismounted without a word. His boots crunched on broken glass as he approached the coach door. Most men would have checked for valuables first. Elijah reached for the woman and child. Lena's eyes fluttered open. The giant man above her had a weathered face and gentle hands. She tried to speak but only managed a whisper. Elijah lifted them both as if they weighed nothing. He wrapped them in his coat and secured them on his horse. The ride to his ranch took 2 hours. Neither mother nor child stirred. The Kane homestead sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills. The house was larger than most, built for a family that no longer existed. Elijah carried his passengers inside and placed them in the guest bedroom. The room still held traces of a woman's touch: lace curtains, a carved wooden mirror, a quilt with delicate stitching. Sarah's things remained exactly as she had left them 3 years ago. Elijah worked through the night. He prepared formula from canned milk and sugar. He found baby clothes in a trunk that had been packed away. His large fingers struggled with the tiny garments, but he persevered. Dawn broke when Lena finally stirred. She found herself in a clean bed wearing a fresh nightgown. Ruby lay beside her, clean and fed and sleeping peacefully. Panic seized her. Where was she? Who had brought them here? She sat up too quickly and nearly fainted. Elijah appeared in the doorway. He held a tray with soup and bread. When he saw her distress, he set the tray down and stepped back. He pointed to himself and then to his chest, trying to communicate that he meant no harm. Lena pulled Ruby closer. Every instinct screamed danger. Men didn't help women like her without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson the hard way in New Orleans, but this man kept his distance. He gestured to the food and then to the door, indicating she was free to leave. His actions confused her. Why save them just to let them go? Elijah left the room and returned with paper and pencil. He wrote in careful script, "You are safe. Rest. Heal." Lena stared at the note. His penmanship was better than most men she knew. Teachers recognized education when they saw it. But why wouldn't he speak? Days passed in careful observation. Elijah brought meals and supplies without being asked. He fixed a broken window shutter without explanation. He tended to Ruby when Lena slept, never presuming but always available. Lena began to notice things. The way he watched her lips when she spoke to Ruby, how he never responded to sounds behind him, the careful way he positioned himself to see everyone in a room. Understanding dawned slowly. Then, all at once, she tested her theory by calling his name when his back was turned. No response. She clapped her hands loudly. Nothing. Finally, she walked around to face him and spoke directly. His eyes lit up with recognition. He had been reading her lips all along. The revelation changed everything. His silence wasn't judgment or coldness. It was simply who he was. He had saved them not despite their differences, but because he understood what it meant to be misunderstood. Lena began teaching him simple signs she remembered from a deaf student back in New Orleans. He responded eagerly, hungry for communication beyond written notes. In return, he showed her how to care for the ranch, how to read weather patterns, how to survive on the frontier. Their days developed a rhythm. Morning chores done together in comfortable quiet, afternoons spent with Ruby, who seemed to thrive under their joint attention, evenings by the fire, sharing stories through gestures and written words. Sheriff Tom Barrow arrived on a Tuesday. The lawman's suspicious eyes took in the unusual household arrangement. A black woman, a white rancher, a mixed-race baby. The implications weren't lost on anyone. Lena introduced herself as the housekeeper. Elijah nodded along with the deception. They both knew the truth would create problems neither was ready to face. The sheriff asked pointed questions about her background and employment. Lena answered carefully, sticking close to facts while omitting dangerous details. Her teaching experience made her a convincing employee. Her obvious care for the household satisfied most concerns. But Barrow's parting look carried warning. The frontier had rules about such arrangements. Break them at your own risk. After he left, Lena and Elijah sat in heavy silence. The outside world wouldn't leave them alone forever. Decisions would have to be made. Hearts would have to be examined. The fragile peace they had built could shatter with the next visitor's arrival. Ruby gurgled happily from her makeshift crib, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering around their makeshift family. Months passed like pages in a well-loved book. Lena's strength returned along with her confidence. She managed the household accounts with the precision of her teaching days. Ruby grew plump and happy, crawling across the wooden floors with determination. Elijah watched them both with quiet satisfaction. The house felt alive again. Laughter replaced the hollow silence that had haunted these rooms since Sarah's death. He found himself smiling at small moments. Ruby's first attempts at standing, Lena humming while she cooked, the way sunlight caught in her hair during morning chores. Their communication had evolved beyond simple necessity. Shared glances spoke volumes. A touch on the shoulder conveyed understanding. They moved around each other like dancers who had rehearsed for years, but the outside world pressed closer each day. Clara Danvers arrived on a Wednesday with fresh bread and sharp eyes. The neighboring widow took one look at the domestic scene and saw straight through their careful charade. Lena tensed, ready to defend their arrangement. Clara surprised her by sitting down and asking to hold Ruby. The older woman studied the baby's features with knowing eyes. She had raised 4 children of her own. She recognized love when she saw it, regardless of blood ties. Clara became their first ally. She brought news from town and advice from experience. Her presence legitimized their household in ways they hadn't expected. Neighbors trusted Clara's judgment. If she approved of the arrangement, perhaps it wasn't as scandalous as it appeared, but not everyone shared Clara's open mind. Preacher Matthias Kane rode into town with fire in his eyes and judgment on his tongue. He preached against the corruption he saw spreading across the frontier. Mixed households, unmarried arrangements, the breakdown of Christian values. His sermons drew crowds hungry for righteousness and scapegoats. Whispers followed Lena when she ventured to town. Pointing fingers tracked her movements. The preacher's followers saw themselves as soldiers in a holy war. The first threat came as a note nailed to their fence post. Crude letters spelled out biblical warnings about fornication and racial mixing. Elijah found it during morning chores and burned it before Lena could see. But the harassment escalated. Someone scattered their cattle during the night. Gate posts were knocked down. A bucket of paint was thrown against their barn door, spelling out words that made Lena's cheeks burn with shame. Sheriff Barrow visited again, this time with warnings instead of suspicions. The good people of town were getting restless. Perhaps it would be better if the arrangement was formalized or ended, for everyone's safety. Lena packed their belongings that night. Her hands shook as she folded Ruby's tiny dresses. They had been foolish to think this peace could last. The frontier was no place for impossible dreams. She found Elijah in his workshop, bent over his latest project. Wood shavings curled around his boots like fallen leaves. His calloused hands shaped something beautiful from rough timber. It was a crib, hand-carved with intricate details, smooth rails that would never splinter tender skin, a mattress sized perfectly for a growing child. He had spent weeks on it, working by lamplight after long days on the ranch. He looked up when her shadow fell across his workbench. His eyes asked the question his voice couldn't. Lena set down her packed bag and picked up a piece of sandpaper. Together they finished smoothing the final rail. The next morning brought worse news. Their barn smoldered in the gray dawn. The fire had been contained to one corner, but the message was clear: leave or face escalation. Clara arrived with a wagon full of neighbors. Men who rarely spoke to each other worked side by side to repair the damage. Women brought food and comfort. The preacher's followers had overplayed their hand. Decent people didn't tolerate arson, regardless of their feelings about unconventional households. But the threats continued in smaller ways: broken windows, poisoned water troughs, dead animals left in their path as warnings. Elijah grew protective in ways that both comforted and worried Lena. He rode the property boundaries every morning, checking for signs of intrusion. He kept a rifle closer than before. His gentle nature hardened into something more dangerous. The final provocation came during their monthly trip to town for supplies. Ruby rode on Lena's hip, while Elijah loaded sacks of grain into their wagon. The baby had grown bold and curious, reaching for everything within her grasp. A group of the preacher's followers surrounded them outside the general store. Hard men with harder hearts spoke words meant to wound. They questioned Ruby's parentage in crude terms. They suggested solutions that made Lena's blood run cold. Elijah stepped forward without a sound. His size alone scattered most of the group, but their leader, a thin man with yellow teeth, held his ground. The confrontation lasted only minutes. No blows were exchanged. But threats were made and lines were drawn. The town would have to choose sides soon. That evening, by the creek that ran through their property, Elijah presented Lena with a letter. His handwriting was careful and deliberate. The words spoke of love discovered in unexpected places, of families built by choice rather than chance, of a future that included all three of them, legally and permanently. He was asking her to marry him, not for convenience or protection, but for love. Lena's answer came in the form of tears that had nothing to do with sorrow. Ruby clapped her hands as if she understood the importance of the moment. Their kiss sealed a promise that neither threats nor fire could break. They would face whatever came next as a family, bound by something stronger than law or social approval. Clara Danvers insisted on witnessing the ceremony. She arrived at dawn with her best dress and a bouquet of wildflowers picked from her own garden. The older woman had officiated enough frontier weddings to know the essential words. Lena wore Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. The white lace felt sacred against her skin. Ruby gurgled happily in her arms. Dressed in the finest baby clothes Clara could provide, Elijah stood by the creek in his only good suit. His hair was combed back and his beard freshly trimmed. He had written his vows on paper, words too important to trust to memory or gesture. The morning sun cast golden light through the cottonwood trees. Water babbled over smooth stones. Birds sang from hidden branches. Nature itself seemed to bless their union. Clara spoke the traditional words with conviction. She had seen enough marriages to recognize real love when it stood before her. These two had already proven their commitment through months of hardship. Elijah's written vows spoke of promises deeper than law. He would protect Lena and Ruby with his life. He would love them through whatever storms lay ahead. He would be the father Ruby needed and the husband Lena deserved. Lena's response came through tears and sign language. She had memorized the words he had taught her. Her hands spoke of gratitude transformed into devotion, of friendship grown into something eternal, of three hearts becoming one family. They exchanged simple gold bands that had belonged to Elijah's parents. Clara pronounced them husband and wife before God and witnesses. Their kiss sealed vows that transcended every barrier the world might place between them. But their joy was short-lived. Hoofbeats thundered across the prairie as a dozen riders approached. Preacher Cain led his followers toward the creek with righteous fury burning in their eyes. Someone had been watching the ranch. Someone had reported the ceremony. The preacher's voice boomed across the water. He declared their union invalid before God and man. No Christian nation could recognize such an abomination. Their children would be bastards. Their souls would burn for eternity. Clara stepped forward with surprising courage. She had lived on the frontier for 30 years. She had buried 2 husbands and raised 4 children alone. No traveling preacher would intimidate her on this day. She reminded the crowd that marriage was a civil matter. The territorial government recognized all legal unions. Church approval was preferred but not required. The law was clear on their side. But Preacher Cain cared little for territorial law. He served a higher authority. His followers nodded agreement with every condemning word. They had come to stop this ceremony by whatever means necessary. Elijah moved to shield his new family. His massive frame blocked their view of Lena and Ruby. His silence spoke louder than any threat. Violence hung in the air like storm clouds. Then something unexpected happened. Other riders appeared on the horizon. Sheriff Barrow led a group of townspeople who had come to witness the spectacle. But instead of condemnation, many faces showed curiosity and even sympathy. Mrs. Henderson from the general store spoke up. She had watched Lena shop for months. The young mother was always polite and well-behaved. Her money was good. Her manners were better than most. Old Pete from the livery stable added his voice. Elijah Cain was the most honest man he knew. Never cheated anyone, always paid his debts. If he chose this woman, she must be worthy. The crowd began to divide. Preacher Cain's followers held their ground with religious fervor, but reasonable people started asking reasonable questions. What harm had this family actually caused? Who had been injured by their arrangement? The ceremony continued despite the opposition. Clara raised her voice above the protests. She pronounced Elijah and Lena legally married under territorial law. Their union was binding regardless of any church's opinion. Ruby chose that moment to laugh and clap her hands. The baby's innocent joy cut through the tension like sunshine through storm clouds. Even some of the preacher's followers smiled despite themselves. But Cain refused to accept defeat. He promised consequences for this mockery of Christian values. His followers would remember this day. Justice would come in God's time. The crowd dispersed slowly, tensions unresolved. Clara hugged the new couple and promised her continued support. Sheriff Barrow offered grudging congratulations and renewed warnings about keeping the peace. That night brought both celebration and consequences. Lena and Elijah shared their first meal as husband and wife, while Ruby slept in her handmade crib. The house felt different somehow. More complete, more permanent. But they could hear riders in the darkness. Voices carried on the wind. The preacher's followers were planning something more than protests. Elijah checked the locks twice. He positioned his rifle where he could reach it quickly. Years of frontier living had taught him to prepare for trouble before it arrived. Lena found herself touching her belly with wonder and concern. The signs had been subtle but unmistakable. Morning sickness, tender breasts, a missed monthly cycle. She was carrying Elijah's child. The timing complicated everything. They now had even more to protect, but also more reason to fight for their place in this hostile world. Their growing family deserved a future free from fear and persecution. She decided to tell Elijah in the morning. Tonight belonged to their wedding vows and newlywed dreams. Tomorrow would bring whatever challenges awaited. Outside, the preacher's followers rode through the darkness, planning their next move. They had failed to stop the ceremony, but the war for the soul of their community had only begun. The Kane Ranch sat in peaceful silence, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. Inside, a new family slept under one roof, bound by love and protected by determination that would soon be tested beyond measure. Spring brought new life to the Kane Ranch. Ruby took her first steps across the kitchen floor, stumbling into Elijah's waiting arms. Her laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long. She called him Papa in broken syllables that made his eyes water with joy. Lena's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite her worries. Elijah built a second crib with even more care than the first. Clara visited weekly with advice and encouragement. The ranch prospered under their joint management. The townspeople had mostly accepted their marriage. Business continued at the general store. Sheriff Barrow nodded politely during their monthly visits. Even Preacher Kane had moved on to other towns and different causes. Peace felt permanent until it shattered in an instant. Sheriff Barrow rode up their lane on a Tuesday morning with dread written across his weathered face. He dismounted slowly, like a man carrying terrible news. His usual gruffness had been replaced by something approaching sympathy. Ruby played in the dirt nearby, making towers from small stones. Lena sat on the porch mending clothes while Elijah repaired fence posts. The domestic scene made Barrow's task even harder. He cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change everything. Marcus Webb had found them. Ruby's biological father was coming to claim his daughter. Legal papers gave him paternal rights that superseded any adoption or marriage. The blood drained from Lena's face. She had hoped Marcus would never discover their location. New Orleans seemed a lifetime away, but the past had finally caught up with them. Barrow explained what he knew. Marcus had become a successful businessman in Dallas. His new wife was barren. They needed an heir for his growing empire. Private investigators had tracked Lena across 3 states. The sheriff handed over official documents bearing territorial seals. Marcus would arrive within 48 hours with federal marshals. The law was clearly on his side. Biological fathers held absolute rights over their children. Elijah read the papers with growing fury. His hands shook as he absorbed the legal language. 2 years of love and care meant nothing to territorial courts. Blood trumped choice in every jurisdiction. Lena snatched Ruby from the dirt and held her close. The toddler sensed her mother's distress and began to cry. How could she explain to a 2-year-old that her papa might not be her real father in the eyes of the law? Clara arrived within hours of receiving their desperate message. She brought her lawyer brother Samuel from the county seat. The elderly man reviewed the documents with professional expertise and growing pessimism. The legal situation was nearly hopeless. Marcus had never formally surrendered his parental rights. His abandonment was cruel, but not legally binding. Elijah's adoption papers were worthless without the biological father's consent. But Clara refused to accept defeat. She organized the women of town like a general preparing for battle. They would testify to Lena's devotion and Elijah's fatherhood. Character witnesses could sometimes sway territorial judges. Elijah spent the day documenting their life together. His methodical nature served them well now. He had kept detailed records of Ruby's development. Photographs showed her growth and happiness. Written accounts proved consistent care and love. His observational skills, honed by years of silent living, had created an archive of their family life. Every milestone was recorded. Every moment of joy was preserved. The evidence painted a picture of devoted parenthood. Lena prepared for the fight of her life. Her teaching background had taught her to organize arguments logically. She outlined Ruby's needs and their ability to meet them. She documented Marcus's abandonment and subsequent absence. But doubt crept in during quiet moments. What if legal rights trumped moral ones? What if love couldn't compete with blood? What if she lost the daughter who had become the center of their world? The night before Marcus's arrival, Lena told Elijah about the baby growing inside her. He placed his large hand on her still flat belly with wonder and terror. Another child to protect. Another reason to fight. They made plans for every possibility. If they lost Ruby, they would follow her to Dallas. If legal challenges failed, they would appeal to higher courts. If all else failed, they would start over somewhere beyond Marcus's reach. Ruby slept peacefully in her crib, unaware of the storm gathering around her. She had known only love and security in her short life, two devoted parents who would die before letting harm touch her. The morning brought dust clouds on the horizon. Marcus Webb arrived in a fancy carriage with federal marshals riding escort. His expensive clothes and polished boots announced his success to anyone watching. Lena's hands trembled as she watched her former lover step down from his carriage. He looked older and harder than she remembered. Success had not softened his edges or warmed his cold eyes. The marshals carried official paperwork and legal authority. They could remove Ruby immediately if Marcus demanded it. Only his willingness to follow proper procedures gave them any hope of fighting back. Marcus surveyed the ranch with obvious distaste. He had expected to find his daughter living in squalor. The well-maintained property and obvious prosperity complicated his narrative of rescue. He knocked on their door with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Lena opened it with Ruby on her hip, both of them dressed in their finest clothes. The toddler stared at the stranger with curious eyes. Marcus saw his own features reflected in his daughter's face. 2 years had changed the infant he barely remembered into a beautiful child who clearly thrived under their care. But sentiment would not deter him from his purpose. He had come to claim his property and secure his legacy. Marcus Webb stepped into their home like a man surveying property he already owned. His expensive suit and gold pocket watch gleamed in the morning light. He barely glanced at Lena before focusing entirely on Ruby. The toddler clung to her mother's skirt, sensing danger in the stranger's presence. Marcus knelt down and extended his hand, expecting immediate recognition and affection. Ruby buried her face against Lena's leg. Marcus frowned at his daughter's rejection. He had expected gratitude, not fear. In his mind, he was rescuing Ruby from an unsuitable situation. Her reluctance was merely evidence of improper upbringing. The federal marshal read the custody order aloud. Legal language transformed their family into a property dispute. Marcus Webb was granted immediate custody of his biological daughter. No appeals were recognized at the territorial level. Lena's legs nearly buckled. 2 years of love reduced to meaningless sentiment by cold legal facts. She clutched Ruby tighter, as if her embrace could somehow override federal law. Elijah entered from the barn, his massive frame filling the doorway. His eyes took in the scene with growing understanding. The well-dressed stranger, the official papers, Lena's terrified expression. Their worst fears had materialized. Marcus studied his competition with obvious disdain. A deaf rancher hardly seemed like formidable opposition. He had dealt with far more sophisticated adversaries in his business dealings. But Clara Danvers arrived before Marcus could act on his legal advantage. She brought a carriage full of townswomen who had come to bear witness. Their presence transformed the private matter into a public spectacle. Mrs. Henderson from the general store spoke first. She had watched Lena shop with Ruby for months. The child was always clean, well-fed, and obviously loved. Her attachment to both parents was unmistakable to anyone with eyes. Old Pete from the livery stable added his testimony. He had seen Elijah teach Ruby to pet horses gently. The giant man's patience with the toddler proved his devotion better than any legal document. Even the schoolteacher testified to Lena's character. Her education and refinement made her an ideal mother for any child. Ruby would receive better upbringing here than in most wealthy households. Marcus grew impatient with the testimonials. These frontier people failed to understand basic legal principles. Biological fathers held absolute rights over their offspring. Sentiment could not override blood. He produced photographs of his Dallas mansion and business empire. Ruby would inherit substantial wealth and social position. She would attend the finest schools and marry into respectable society. Love was admirable, but security was practical. Sheriff Barrow attempted to mediate between competing claims. Both sides presented compelling arguments. The law favored Marcus, but justice seemed to favor the Canes. Solomon himself would struggle with such a decision. Then Marcus made his crucial mistake. He grabbed Ruby's arm and tried to pull her away from Lena. The toddler screamed and reached desperately for her mother. Her terror filled the small house with heartbreaking sound. Ruby broke free and ran straight to Elijah. She wrapped her tiny arms around his massive leg and sobbed against his knee. Through her tears, she called him Papa with unmistakable love and trust. The federal marshal shifted uncomfortably. He had children of his own. Ruby's obvious preference for her adoptive father complicated his duty to enforce the custody order. Even legal obligations had limits when confronted with such emotional reality. Sheriff Barrow seized the moment to reveal his investigation into Marcus Webb's background. The businessman had abandoned not just Lena, but 2 other women with his children. A pattern of desertion, followed by convenient reclamation, undermined his claims of paternal concern. Court records from Louisiana showed Marcus had disputed paternity when child support was demanded. He had denied Ruby's legitimacy until it became advantageous to claim her. His legal rights were tainted by documented abandonment and denial. Clara's lawyer brother presented adoption papers that had been quietly filed months earlier. Elijah's legal claim predated Marcus's custody petition by several weeks. Proper procedures had been followed through territorial courts. The marshal reviewed the competing documents with growing confusion. Legal technicalities created gray areas that federal authority could not easily resolve. Territorial judges would need to sort through conflicting claims and jurisdictions. Marcus realized his certain victory was slipping away. He had expected simple enforcement of paternal rights, not complex legal challenges. His private investigators had failed to uncover the adoption proceedings. Ruby's continued sobbing provided heartbreaking soundtrack to the legal arguments. She clung to Elijah with desperate strength, calling for Papa through her tears. Even strangers could see where her heart belonged. The townswomen formed a protective circle around the Kane family. Their solidarity sent a clear message to any who might separate this child from her chosen parents. The community would not stand idle while injustice was served. Mrs. Henderson spoke with surprising authority. She reminded everyone that Ruby had thrived under Lena and Elijah's care. Disrupting a stable, loving home served no one's interests, especially not the child's. The federal marshal made his decision. Competing legal claims required judicial resolution. Ruby would remain with the Kanes until territorial courts could sort through the conflicting paperwork. Justice demanded proper proceedings, not hasty enforcement. Marcus sputtered protests about his legal rights in federal authority, but the marshal had made his ruling. Due process would be followed regardless of anyone's impatience. Ruby's sobs quieted as she realized the strangers were leaving. She peeked out from behind Elijah's leg with cautious hope. Her papa was still here. Her mama still held her close. The scary man was walking away. Marcus climbed back into his carriage with fury replacing confidence. This frontier farce had delayed his plans, but not defeated them. He would return with better lawyers and clearer legal authority. The carriage disappeared in a cloud of dust, taking the immediate threat with it. But everyone knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The real battle would be fought in territorial courts with Ruby's future hanging in the balance. The territorial courthouse buzzed with nervous energy. Judge Harrison had traveled from the capital to resolve the custody dispute that had divided the community. His reputation for fairness preceded him, offering hope to both sides. Lena sat in the front row with Ruby on her lap. The toddler played quietly with a small wooden horse Elijah had carved for her. She remained blissfully unaware that her entire future hung in the balance of legal arguments. Marcus arrived with 2 expensive lawyers from Dallas. Their polished appearance and confident manner suggested they had handled similar cases before. Money bought the best legal representation available. Clara's brother Samuel represented the Kane family with quiet determination. He had spent weeks researching territorial adoption laws and paternal abandonment precedents. His modest practice specialized in frontier families, not wealthy businessmen. Judge Harrison called the court to order with grave formality. He understood that his decision would affect not just one child, but the entire community's faith in territorial justice. Legal principles and human compassion would be weighed carefully. Marcus's lead attorney presented their case with practiced eloquence. Biological fathers held sacred rights that no court could dissolve. Marcus Webb sought only to provide his daughter with advantages that humble ranchers could never offer. The lawyer displayed photographs of Marcus's Dallas mansion and thriving business empire. Ruby would inherit substantial wealth and social position. Her education would open doors that remained forever closed to frontier children. Samuel countered with documentation of Marcus's abandonment pattern. 3 women in Louisiana had borne his children. All had been deserted when pregnancy became inconvenient. All had struggled alone while he built his fortune. Court records showed Marcus had denied paternity when child support was demanded. He had called Ruby illegitimate until claiming her became advantageous. His legal rights were corrupted by documented abandonment and denial. Judge Harrison studied the evidence with careful attention. Marcus's pattern of behavior painted him as an opportunistic father who claimed children when convenient and abandoned them when burdensome. Ruby grew restless during the lengthy proceedings. She wandered toward Elijah and climbed onto his lap with complete trust. Her small hands explored his beard while she babbled contentedly in baby talk. The sight moved even hardened court observers. Ruby's obvious attachment to Elijah spoke louder than any legal argument. 2 years of constant care had created bonds that transcended biological connections. Lena testified about their daily life with quiet dignity. She described Ruby's first steps, first words, and first smiles. Every milestone had been shared with Elijah as equal partner in parenting responsibilities. Marcus took the stand with arrogant confidence. He spoke of his business success and social connections. His wife desperately wanted children to complete their respectable household. Ruby would want for nothing in their care. But Samuel's cross-examination exposed crucial weaknesses. Marcus knew nothing about Ruby's current development. He could not name her favorite foods or describe her personality. Biological connection meant nothing without actual knowledge. The lawyer pressed harder about Marcus's abandonment of other children. Each question revealed another instance of paternal irresponsibility. The pattern was clear and damning. Marcus grew defensive under sustained questioning. He claimed those other relationships were different. Those women had been unsuitable mothers. Ruby deserved better than frontier poverty. Judge Harrison asked Marcus to approach his daughter. The businessman knelt beside Ruby with awkward formality. He offered her an expensive doll purchased that morning in town. Ruby studied the stranger with serious eyes. She accepted the gift politely, but immediately returned to Elijah's protective embrace. Her preference was unmistakable to everyone present. The judge asked Ruby a simple question in gentle tones. Who was her papa? Without hesitation, she pointed to Elijah and repeated the word she had learned to associate with safety and love. Marcus's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. His own daughter had rejected him publicly in favor of a deaf rancher. The humiliation stung worse than any legal defeat. Clara testified about the Kane family's integration into the community. She described their contributions to church functions and neighborly assistance during difficult times. They had become valued members of frontier society. Mrs. Henderson added her voice to the growing chorus of support. She had observed the family's weekly shopping trips for months. Ruby was always clean, well-behaved, and obviously cherished by both parents. Even Sheriff Barrow testified reluctantly in their favor. The Kane household was peaceful and law-abiding. Ruby appeared healthy and happy under their care. No complaints had ever been filed against them. Judge Harrison called for closing arguments as afternoon shadows lengthened. The courtroom remained packed with townspeople who had come to witness justice being served. Samuel spoke passionately about the difference between biological connection and genuine parenthood. Elijah and Lena had earned their roles through daily devotion and sacrifice. Love could not be purchased with wealth or claimed through biology alone. Marcus's attorney made a final appeal to legal precedent. Paternal rights existed to protect children from unsuitable guardians. Wealthy fathers could provide opportunities that poor ones could not match. Judge Harrison retired to his chambers for deliberation. The wait seemed endless to both sides. Ruby napped peacefully in Lena's arms, exhausted by the day's tensions and unfamiliar surroundings. 2 hours later, the judge returned with his decision. He acknowledged Marcus's biological connection, but found his pattern of abandonment legally disqualifying. Fathers who denied their children could not later claim them for convenience. Elijah's adoption was ruled valid and binding. Ruby would remain with the parents who had chosen her completely and loved her consistently. The law existed to protect children's best interests, not to serve adult desires. Marcus stormed from the courtroom with his expensive lawyers trailing behind. His business empire meant nothing in the face of legal defeat and public humiliation. The community erupted in quiet celebration. Justice had been served fairly and compassionately. The Kane family could finally live without fear of separation or legal challenge. 6 months later, Lena gave birth to Samuel Kane in the same bedroom where she had first awakened as a stranger. Clara assisted with the delivery while Elijah paced nervously outside. Ruby peered at her baby brother with curious fascination. She patted his tiny hand gently and declared him her baby to anyone who would listen. The family circle had expanded with perfect completeness. The traveling photographer captured their portrait on a golden autumn afternoon. 4 faces reflected the contentment that comes from choosing love over convention and fighting for family against all odds. Lena wrote in her journal that evening while the children slept peacefully. She reflected not on the man who had abandoned her, but on the one who had stayed. Their love had grown slowly but lasted completely, proving that the best families are built through choice rather than chance.